Windhorse is our innate ability to uplift ourselves and our environment by giving rise to a positive energy that is both relaxed and disciplined. Since 1981, Windhorse Community Services has integrated this understanding with modern conventional therapies, meditation, and contemplative traditions in the development of at-home, whole-person mental health recovery. Windhorse Journal is dedicated to the mission of communicating decades of clinical and personal experience to professionals, educators, students, and anyone seeking recovery options. Please join the dialogue.
Welcome to Windhorse Journal Entry 79. Could I be a voice for those still suffering? This is the final episode in a 5-part series with a former Windhorse client and her team. They discuss the Windhorse principle that recovery is possible, no matter how confused a mind has become, and the trust in basic goodness that they held throughout this journey together. We hope you enjoy.
Welcome everyone to the Windhorse Journal. I'm your host, Chuck Knapp, and I'm so pleased and honored to be presenting today's podcast, a conversation with a former team about the completely remarkable recovery journey they shared. We're joined today by our dear friend and former client, Julia, and by Janneli Chapin and Jack Gipple, who were her primary team members. So over the course of our discussions that we've had now for some months, I think this is our 5th recording session, we've generally organized around 4 principles that underlie Windhorse work. First being that people are fundamentally sane. We experience ourselves and think of all people as being fundamentally sane. We're inseparable from our environments. Recovery is being a path of discovering and synchronizing with one's intrinsic sanity and health. And the last point is around recovery, and that recovery is completely possible no matter how confused the mind has become. And Julia, when we had discussed this in a planning meeting, you found that to be a particularly rich, cluster of topics. And so just looking at the principle that recovery is possible, no matter how confused the mind has become. I'd love to hear what you all think about that, what you'd all like to discuss.
Well, the first thing that I think of when you bring that up, Chuck, is that is the guiding principle of this Windhorse work, is really trusting in a client's basic goodness or sanity and ability to recover from any kind of extreme state of mind. And that kind of confidence is not pathologizing the client, but really seeing those pinpoints of energy or places where, in basic attendance, for instance, we notice where the health or the sanity is residing. And we try to just kind of create space for that more, or even enhance it or bring it out. So that's what I think of when you talk about that or ask about that.
Yeah, I think about that as a clinician, somebody in the work. If you didn't believe that recovery was possible, like maybe to look at in the negative, if you didn't believe in that, then you'd have to sort people into people who are and aren't. And then it's a funny thing, because then there would be some people you would completely give up on. There'd be a sense of like, oh yeah, they belong in that category or this category. So I think, like, very practically, I'm interested in just the practical application. Is it, I have to hold that value and believe it and know it, even if the person I'm working with doesn't believe it, or the family I'm working with doesn't believe it. I have to hold that in order to keep my own kind of confidence up.
And Jack, you said something in there too, and Janneli, you as well, that this isn't just hypothetical. This is actually born in experience as well. You've seen this, you've experienced it.
Oh, for sure, yeah. Maybe to personalize it to working with you, Julia, is I think initially when I met you, I didn't know who you are. And the person that I know you as now, I didn't have that experience yet. And I think I had to have some faith and belief that, you were in a really hard place when I first met you, and I had to have some faith and belief that that your recovery path was there and waiting to be stepped onto. I don't think I yet experienced you as traveling the path, although probably in retrospect you were, but I think it took me a while. I can't. It's so long ago, but I would say it took me a month or two before like who you are started to emerge for me, and I started to hear about the full dimension of who you were. But it took a while. I think even before I experienced it, I had faith that you could have this recovery process. So
I think that when you say recovery is possible, that's very abstract.
yeah,
Recovery for me was possible because of certain circumstances that existed. Had those circumstances not existed, recovery would not have happened. Whether they were theoretically possible or not is a moot point. They would not have happened if certain things were not available to me. I think that maybe theoretically, yes, I could have recovered. Obviously, that's true because I think for the most part, I did recover. But that was only because of relationships that I had that provided things to me that allowed that recovery to happen. And I think when you talk about recovery being possible for people, I think you have to expand that view and assume that people are going to have things available to them that everybody does not have. Maybe under ideal circumstances, most people can recover, but most people don't have what I had available to me. And I think that's a really important thing to take into consideration.
I think another thing that's important to consider is what does recovery mean to each person? Because what recovery might mean to you, Julia, will be very different than another client, at Windhorse. I remember one client, when I asked him what recovery was for him, he said, it'll mean when the pizza man can come and deliver a pizza and I don't think it's poisonous. So for him, that was his kind of recovery. So if we think about it in conventional ways, like, oh, you get a job and you have relationships or you go back to school, those might be conventional ways to think about recovery. But then each person, I think, makes their own meaning around what recovery means to them.
Well, I think that's a moving target. Had you asked me at the beginning of my, recovery journey, what recovery might mean for me, I would have said something really different from what I would say now.
Right. Right.
I might have said, well, if I could ever drive a car again, that would be amazing.
Right.
But that continued to evolve as I continue to get better.
Right.
So maybe that guy, his goals for recovery would change.
Right.
And
Right.
continue to make progress.
Yeah. Yeah. And be very individual.
Evolves.
Right. Yeah.
and yeah, even it seems like the pizza, the feeling the pizza's poison is like a metaphor for his whole life. Like that metaphor, if it expanded into his whole life, that would be quite an amazing recovery thing. So as a metaphor, right?
I can remember, Julia, saying for you, sometimes you doubted whether things were going to happen, good things were going to happen for you. And I remember saying things like, well, I'm just going to hold that for you in my heart, that you can move through this difficult situation. I'm thinking about the divorce in particular, and I felt like sometimes I just said, okay, it might not seem like this is going to work or happen for you, but I'm going to hold that until you also can feel it.
I was thinking about that question before we started this meeting earlier. The path of recovery, and I think it started out with this huge crisis happening, and everything that occurred around that. The fear and the fright and the losing power and the losing of everything. Ending up in a hospital, all of a sudden being highly medicated, and just everything in my life changing, losing my family, losing my friends, my job, my life as I had known it. And then trying to make some sense out of all of that. That was the beginning. Then trying to kind of level out and begin a path back. So it's such a long journey, but it begins with trying to accept where you are, where I was, and get over the terrible feeling of being so frightened, and being so alone.
Julia, like accept, that seems like a really important word to me, because what about when an obstacle to recovery is when you have this really, one has a really solid picture of what that means. Like if you had said recovery meant that your marriage would be repaired, and that was just a non-negotiable, that had to be, that would have been a problem. I think part of recovery is accepting life on the conditions of life, and there's a lot of people I've encountered that's what they really have a hell of a time accepting, of like, no, I won't accept life on that terms. It's got to be the picture I have of life, and that can be a tremendous obstacle. You were able to like keep embracing the life conditions in front of you. Well, I'm not, and it wasn't easy, but that was part of your strength, was you're able to keep engaging with the world as it presented itself right now. And that seems to me an important part of this.
It took me a while to get to that point. I mean, I found myself in a hospital getting shock treatment. I mean, I just was amazed that I was even alive, being tied down to tables all the time. I couldn't even wrap my head around the fact that who I was. I just felt so incredibly terrified and alone. And I think everything was taken away from me, including my clothes. I mean, everything was taken away from me. I had no one that was even allowed to visit me, or wanted to visit me. And it's like you're stripped down to the very basics of your just being a person, not even a person. And it's terrifying until you can start feeling like you have some power over your life again. And that took a long time. I didn't really think about my marriage or anything. I didn't even think about that. That was so far from my thoughts, because I couldn't even think that far outside of where I was or what was happening to me. People go through different experiences, but I was just living in a state of terror and not knowing what was going to happen to me, what I was going to do to myself or what other people were going to do to me. Very scary. I remember what you said, Janneli, about power. I had no power over anything. People did whatever they wanted to me. Very scary. And until you get some control back over yourself, it's hard to think about recovery.
Julia, recovery implies from something. And what would you say, recovering from what?
That's something I've been thinking about as well. I have been told over the years that I am bipolar, or I am an OCD, or I am a this or a that. And I think that after a while, I started to feel that that was who I am or what I am. And it was hard to separate that from I'm a person with bipolar disorder, or I'm a person that has OCD. I'm not bipolar. I'm a person that has bipolar disorder. And that's a very different thing than being a bipolar, or, it's, you start to, I started to think of myself as not being a person, but being a disease or being an illness. And that's how I was looked at. That's how I was described by people, and in the medical community, certainly. And I started to think of myself as being a disease. And it's hard to think of recovering when you are a disease, and not having a disease, but being a disease. So that's a very important thing, I think, to realize that you're not a disease. You have an illness, but if you have it, you can treat it, you can get it under control, you can deal with it. But if you are it, then that's really different.
It goes like, if the clinicians you worked with didn't believe in basic goodness, if the clinicians do believe, well, there's people who are irredeemable, and then there are people who have a possibility to recover. If the clinicians think in those two categories, then I'm thinking they that's the ultimate label, right? It's like, oh, that's a bipolar person who's unredeemable. Like, then how could you even find yourself, if the person you're working with doesn't have some basic sense of basic goodness, for holding you and themselves in that regard.
Right. That's right. And it, for me, it brings it back to something I've talked about over and over again, the importance of relationships. And relationships, I've had critical relationships with all of you, especially with you, Jack and Janneli, and with Dr. Green, who I certainly would not have recovered without, but also with certain other people who carried me through, and I wouldn't have recovered without them. My friend Joan, who's been with me all of my life since I was 7, and we talked all the time in the hospital, just always. She was always there for me, and just being so supportive, and just being there, talking about things I wouldn't have been able to talk to other people about. She was just always there for me. Anytime, day or night, she was there. And the other relationship that happened, that was just like this incredible thing, was my sister. I grew up with a sister 2 years older than me, who I never had any relationship with. My sister went in one direction, and I went in a different direction, and we were separated because of the politics of my family. And we were kids, we had no control over it. And so we had nothing to do with each other growing up. And I realized, listening back to one of the first podcasts, I listened to it over again, and I talked about that I had a sister, and I never said one word about her. And I said, wow, that's amazing. She was not part of my life. And she wasn't. We had no relationship growing up. She sided kind of with my mother, and I sided with my father, and we had nothing to do with each other, even though we were 2 years apart in age. And then as we got older, and I developed this horrible, terrible illness, she was there for me. She was there for me in every possible way. She was there for me and providing things that I would never have survived without. She found Windhorse. So she was responsible for Windhorse, providing Windhorse. And she found Dr. Green, so, and provided, she paid him, basically, is what happened. But, more than that, she called me all the time. We talked on the phone all the time. This was a person that I had nothing to do with most of my life. We just talked together. I trusted her. She became my sister when we became adults. She just gave to me. I didn't give anything to her. I had nothing to give. And she just gave to me. She gave to me, and she provided all kinds of things, and herself. And I knew I could trust her. And now I'm finally at the point in my life where I can be a sister to her. And, that's one of the great feelings of having reached this point in my life, that we have conversations where I offer her advice and we just go back and forth as sisters. We talk about things, we talk about books, we just do things that sisters do. We went to a spa together. I am so incredibly grateful for that, because I finally feel like I can be a sister too, and accept things from her. And it's an equal relationship. And it's the most amazing thing to me, that has developed. That's one of the gifts of this illness, that has developed for me. And it's just continuing to improve. Our relationship has just continued to be stronger and stronger over the years. And I'm just so incredibly happy about that. She's been amazing. I just really love her so much. And that's been one of the gifts of this illness. So I guess if there can be good things that come out of it, and there are other good things that have come out of it as well, but that's been one of the most amazing things that has happened.
That's really great to hear you say. And I remember part of the path was you being really mad at her at times and railing on her, and that it's great to hear you've come to this point with her.
It has been an incredible experience for me. I think that's been one of the most profound experiences for me. And I realized that she loves me. And it took this crazy, horrible nightmare for me to develop my relationship with my sister. So that's been a gift. I've had two people, my sister and my friend Joan, who have been there nonstop for me. I couldn't have made it without them.
Julia, I like how you've taken us back to the very beginning of the conversation, where the term recovery is possible sounds pretty abstract, and yes, and that with conditions, like you started naming, with certain conditions being present, yeah, that makes sense. And relationships. So your sister, your friend, Janneli and Jack, Dr. Green, the relationships have been such a huge part of this. I guess I just wanted to name that. You just pulled back. You really explained your first kind of objection to the abstractness of that.
Well, I just, I wanted to say that I don't know that everyone is lucky enough to have a Jack and Janneli in their lives, or Dr. Green, or family that really support them.
Yeah.
I don't know that that's true for everyone. I don't know that, everyone doesn't just have some therapist that prescribes medicine for them once a month. I don't think that everyone is that lucky. And I wish people could have that. And I don't know how to make that possible, but I I know that I have been incredibly lucky, and I am very appreciative of that. But I think that, yes, people can recover. I believe that wholeheartedly if given the right circumstances. And I think that's key.
It's not a promise that people will recover.
No, it's not a promise, but I think
It's a possibility.
possible. It's a
Yeah.
possibility.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think you also have to want to recover. For a long time, I don't think I wanted to recover. I really think I wanted to die for a long time, although I'm not sure I really did or I would have. I think if I wanted to die, I would have. My kids, uh, they were at a very tender age when they kind of lost me, and I did very painful things that they lived through. They lived through having the police come and put me in handcuffs, and I mean, they witnessed some very terrible things. They were young, and I was overwhelmed with guilt about what they experienced, and I know that their father carried them through, and being a really good father, and he helped them through those terrible times. But they kept me going. My guilt and wanting to make up for that. You can't make up for it, but I wanted to come back and to be a mother again. And now I have a really close relationship with them, and I have 7 grandchildren. I feel like I've been given another shot, and I'm really close with my grandchildren, and I feel like I'm just being given another chance, and I can't make up for what happened, and I feel really bad about so many things. I try not to get too overwhelmed with thinking about it. At least I can try to move forward. So I'm very lucky.
Julie, you just spoke to a couple things in terms of you can have the conditions that are favorable to a recovery process path, but engaging them is a different issue. And one of the things we've talked about is you have a lot of strength. Your urges toward health, your Windhorse in terms of a very strong kind of energy and life force. You're very strong that way, and so you were able to go toward the luck in your life, actually, which is interesting to me because in conversations we had with Joanne Greenberg in our podcasts with her, she talked about luck also, and how that played such a big part in her recovery. And one of the things that struck me then as well was luck is present in a lot of ways for a lot of people, but not everybody knows what to do with it and wants to go toward it or can go toward it. You obviously have.
Yes. Dr. Green came along at a time when I was battered around, not physically battered around, although I felt that way, in the hospital with ECT and, being tied down to tables and all kinds of horrible things. And he was the kindest, gentlest soul I had ever known. That was incredible luck, but it was more than luck. He was just like this big, tall tower of love. I don't know how else to describe him. He was just this gentle person who I just appreciated him so much because he was so opposite from everything I had been experiencing in the hospital before. Everything was so rough and negative, and and hostile feeling. And then along comes this wonderful, kind man that it was just hard not to love him and just appreciate him and so much. So yes, that was really luck. Along with luck, he was just the most incredible person.
I guess what I'm hearing, Julia, in like him, for example, is that he knew how to somehow be with you too. I mean, it was his general nature to be approachable and safe for you. But it's a really big deal, it sounds like, in relationship when a person, especially when they're as vulnerable as you were, when you're as lost as you were, it's really a big deal to know how to show up with a person in that way, so that if you happen to be, in Dr. Green's position, if you happen to be a piece of possible luck for somebody, that you actually help them take advantage of it.
Yes, I think he did everything he could to show me that he was going to be there for me, in spite of everything that I did to make him prove it.
Yeah.
Because I couldn't believe that he would stick around. I didn't believe that he would. Nobody had. So I was so afraid that he wouldn't either, but he did.
Glad you say that. I think it'd be, you're so grateful now. It'd be, I don't want maybe people listening to this to think that that was always your tone, because you just referred to it as like you tested him, like you didn't just accept it in the way you accept it now. It's kind of resolve. There's a sense of resolve and simplicity and like really a lot of honoring and respect of him. And in the time he persevered when you were really angry and hurt, and you demonstrated it a lot. And like you said, you tested him.
I remember that. I think that it's amazing to me that he didn't just say, "I'm really sorry that I won't be able to continue seeing you." It would have been perfectly understandable had he done that.
And sometimes psychiatrists do that.
Absolutely.
I've been there when psychiatrists say that when they're done.
And it would have been perfectly understandable, had he done that. I was awful to him. I agree. I was terrible. I brought razor blades to his office. I mean, I did terrible, terrible things. I called him around the clock at home. I just did. I was horrible.
And I think he it goes back to this basic goodness. And that's the point I keep making of the clinician's stance is I don't think he ever lost track of your basic goodness. And I think even when there were these prickly displays from you, he never thought that was who you were. He always, I think my impression is he could always see through that, and he always knew how much he meant to you, in spite of this kind of flurry of energy that was kind of pushing.
I always brought him food, no matter how angry I was.
And he always ate it, right? He always ate
it. I always brought food. I even went and got pancakes and pancake breakfasts, and I always brought food and all kinds of crafts. And I never went there empty-handed, and I think that showed him. I didn't do it to show him how much I cared about him. I did it because I just cared about him, and I wanted to feed him. I don't know what that whole thing was, but he wanted to talk about it. I never would talk about it, but he never forced me to talk about anything, and I was really happy about that too. And it didn't really matter. I was just happy that he would accept whatever it was, and most of the time he ate everything and seemed to really enjoy it. And I decorated his whole office, I think, with all kinds of crafts from Asia.
He had a really beautiful office.
Mhm.
Yeah.
You did.
Yeah. Let me ask another question here about going back to that place you were in, Julia, when you felt so lost and powerless and everything had been taken away from you. And I'm sure part of you, and I know we've talked about this some, knew how much you'd lost. You knew where you'd been in your life. You knew how much you'd lost. Do you ever remember being afraid of recovery at that point, like of chancing going forward and trying to go back through what it would take to get back to your life?
I don't think that I thought about that in those in those ways. I started to really see myself as being incredibly disabled,
Hmm.
and I started to see myself as being who I was at that time. That's who I saw myself as. And I never saw myself as really recovering. I truly never thought I could ever drive again. I never thought I would ever get better. I really never did. I just, there are certain things that I remember that stayed with me. I would hear people, just in general, complain about how much work they had and how tired they were after a day of work and complaining about their jobs and whatever. And I just remember so vividly being so jealous that I just wish I could be um, complaining about having a lot of work to do, and that I had a job to complain about, and that I could be back in that normal kind of life, because I had nothing to do and I would sit and do nothing all day. And I wished so much that I could be in that normal kind of existence of being overworked and not have time to, whatever, uh, go to the library or take a walk or go to the gym. And I was so envious of that. And I never thought that would happen again. It took such a long, long, long time for that.
So you were longing for it. You weren't afraid of it, but you were longing for it. And it sounds like the people around you were probably holding more of a sense of the possibility, perhaps, of your recovery happening than maybe you were.
I think maybe some people were. I don't really know how. I don't know how some people felt. I don't know if. I mean, I lost contact with most people.
Hmm.
I lost almost all of my friends, everyone except for my two sisters and Joan.
So the people who made, I think, actually, who I was thinking of when I thought about people holding out that view that of the possibility of your recovery was probably Janneli, Jack, and Dr. Green.
Yes, and I don't really know what Jack and Janneli thought about my long-term recovery. We never really talked about that. I don't know what they believed.
Not sure I thought about it either. I think I thought of the next thing. Like when you were start talking about that, I thought about the next thing is I think you could drive, and like you had all these fears, and your ex-husband had put some fearful curses on you about driving. And I remember thinking, yeah, she could probably drive. And we drove out north of Boulder onto some dirt road, and you drove. So I'm not sure I ever, I don't know if I thought of like the long range. I don't know how, in a way, recovery, because it's a path, it's like, well, how far can the person walk the path in this life? I think, I don't know that I kept some abstract distance in my vision. It was more like, well, this isn't the end. She can definitely do, you can do more than this. You can, I always had the confidence you could do the next, you could do the next stretch of the path.
I remember at one point asking Dr. Green why he had agreed to see me as a patient, and did he think that I could recover, because so many people had refused to see me.
Mhm.
Psychiatrists had refused to see me when I was discharged from the hospital. And he said that he felt that he could help me, and he felt that I could get better. He really believed that.
I think he really did believe that to his bones. And I also remember, and I might not be remembering this quite accurately, so you can let me know, but it seemed like for me there was a point, a shift in the work and the healing when Dr. Green said something like, if I knew what it would have taken to get you to this place, I may not have taken it on. And that point of honesty, as painful as that might have been, I felt like he had really assessed your strength and that you're at a place where you could hear that honesty. And I think you got upset with that, but you also, it just seemed like a turning point of something about the honesty of where you were and how strong you were to be able to hear that, and to also know that he loved you and really appreciated the work that you did. And that wasn't what he was saying. It had nothing to do with his care for you, but more like seeing the path that you are on, and the honesty is an important piece of that path, that he could come into the relationship in an honest way.
He took on probably way more than he anticipated. I don't know that anybody would have taken that on, being able to look into the future. That was a hell of a job that he took on.
So that was like maybe 2 years in, Janneli.
Yeah, maybe about 2 years. Yeah.
So that was a really rugged time. It's interesting that he had enough trust to be that honest with you at that point. That's really cool that he did that. Felt he could do that. Does that kind of surprise you, Julie, at this point to hear that?
The first thing that comes to my mind is that when I started to see him, he was a real analyst type, and he just wanted me to talk, and
Right.
I wasn't a talker. I didn't, so I think over the years he learned to talk.
Right.
He
And
learned
share his-
to kind of relate to me, because I didn't talk very much at all. And so I think we developed a very honest relationship with each other. And so, yes, I think he might have said that to me. I think we developed an honest relationship with each other. He wasn't able to just kind of sit back and, close his eyes and, do the psychoanalysis thing. We talked a lot after I started talking, and I asked him a lot of questions all the time. And so I might have asked him something about that.
Yeah, it seems like you were, if I remember, you were asking him to be more genuine with you about his feelings about things. And
yeah,
you were kind of relentless about it, I think.
I think I did ask him a lot of questions like that. Yeah.
Which is different. It's a different stance than the analyst usually takes. So, yeah, I agree. I think that he learned a lot by working with you, and of course, vice versa.
We talked about that in an earlier discussion. Essentially that being on a path like this changes us as the professionals involved. And we talked about that as mutual recovery, but we unfortunately don't have Dr. Green here to be able to talk about that.
To speak for himself.
He learned a lot from you. Yeah. I think there's a lot more recovery than I think is well known because of stigma. Over the years at Windhorse, for instance, there have been a lot of people who have had some kind of recovery path, but they never talked about it because they didn't want to. They didn't feel like outing themselves. I think the world is, according to worldwide statistics as I know them, it's something between like 40 and 60% of people who get some kind of a heavy diagnosis end up in some kind of a recovery process. So they're back in life. They're not drowning in it. but I think it's not as well known.
I have experienced a lot of stigma,
Mhm.
and I would like to talk about that. I
Okay.
think that's really important.
Yeah.
I have no solutions, but I think it's something really important to talk about.
Mhm.
You mentioned something about going back to who you were before. For me, I don't think that happened. I don't know what happens for other people, but I don't think I became a different person. I think I became a stronger person.
Mhm.
I think I'm still the same person that I was, but I don't think we go backwards. I think we incorporate whatever happens. I incorporated the things that happened to me and moved forward. I know it's made me a lot more compassionate towards other people.
How much would you say acceptance is part of your ability to maintain as much, just kind of stability and happiness as you have?
I'm far more accepting, and the term that you use, self love,
Mhm.
I have that far more now than I ever did in my life.
Mhm.
I was always much more critical of myself. I'm much more accepting of my limitations now, and it's okay. I can deal with them. I can deal with needing to take medicine. I can deal with the fact that I'm who I am, and I've had some really difficult experiences, and I'm lucky that I came out. I almost didn't.
Mhm.
I almost didn't survive it, and I'm really happy that I did.
Acceptance brings to mind non-acceptance, and which is a kind of stigma. And we can have stigma toward ourselves,
Yeah,
judgment toward ourselves,
right.
and there's a lot of external stigma, particularly when it comes to mental health issues.
Stigma continues to affect me. I have cuts all over my arms, all over my body, but people don't see my body, but people see my arms. And I wore long sleeve shirts most of my, adult life. And no matter how hot the weather was, I would never wear short sleeve shirts. And that was something I worked on with Dr. Green forever. And I could not wear anything short sleeve because I was afraid people would ask me about the cuts. And they did, always. And I never knew what to say. And I would, if someone ever asked me, I would just make up some crazy story that I went through a glass window or something. And I just knew that they knew that I was lying. And so it always was incredibly hard for me to just accept the fact that I had cut myself, and not really care what other people thought. I couldn't accept myself. And now I wear short sleeves all the time. And if people ask me things, I just, you know, I still don't tell them that I cut myself. I still say I had an accident when I was a child or something. I still haven't gotten to the point where I can tell people, but I'm not sure that I need to tell people. I don't know that it's any of their business, and I don't feel obligated to tell them. But I also am okay with it. I don't need to justify it to anybody,
Mhm.
and I'm perfectly fine with not feeling like I have to explain it to anyone. Took a long time. Stigma is a big thing. I think that one of the reasons I'm trying to do this, whenever I watch a TV program and they talk about somebody that's bipolar or something, it's always a really terribly negative thing. They they portray people as being very negative. That person is very, very negative and does very negative things, and mental illness is made into this very negative ex- you know um, thing. And so I think that if people knew that, a person with bipolar disorder or whatever is a person. I might have bipolar disorder, but I'm still a teacher. I'm still, a grandmother. Most of the time I'm fine. I don't hurt people. I don't do terrible things. I think that things that a lot of people believe are just not true. And maybe it's because they don't know. And maybe if more people could talk about things, these stigmas would be lessened. But it's hard. I'm having a hard time doing it because I'm afraid of what my friends will think.
To be in this conversation, for instance?
No, for this conversation to go public.
Yeah.
For my friends don't know anything about me. I have not told people I work with or worked with. I just don't talk about my past. I just don't feel comfortable telling people. I don't know if I should. Maybe it's a good thing to talk about it because it will help them to understand things more. I just am not at the point where it's easy for me to do, but I'm really trying. It's hard. I guess that's what I'm trying to say is it's hard.
Right.
It's really hard. I remember, I once told a guy, I think you guys know this story, but that I was dating who asked me about the cuts that I had on me. And he said, "Oh, is there a knife under your pillow?" I was devastated. He was joking, but he probably really wasn't joking.
Yeah, I think that story for me points to, the fear that arises in people when they don't understand that someone in a vulnerable state may be experiencing being put in a marginalized position. And I think mental illness, people who haven't experienced it, are afraid often. And so that comment about the knife under the pillow is just that kind of reflection of fear that and bias, some kind of bias that's going on. And in any marginalized group, there's this oppression, and then there's this internalized oppression where we take it on as if it's something wrong with us, but it's really just not understanding that people who are experiencing just extreme states are just as human as all the rest. Most of the time, not even dangerous, but with our fear, we want to put people in those categories.
You don't override it. You have to recognize that there is stigma, and
Mm-hmm.
you make your choices. And I think that's really wise. Like how much you disclose your identity, and yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And it takes a lot of courage to do what you've been doing here, Julia.
Mm-hmm.
I've never lost track of that as we've been doing these conversations. And so I really appreciate you stepping into this like you have been, like you are.
I think through these conversations, like we don't see each other very often at all anymore, Julia, and
No.
and we used to, and but now this gives me kind of a refresher, and it's like you continue to recover. You're I can just hear your gathering confidence, and that you didn't stop your path when you and I stopped working together a lot, and you've continued on, and I'm really glad to see that. That's great.
I think a path, that word says it all. It is a path. Life is a path. And we just keep moving along that path. And I hope I continue to grow and gain in every possible way. It's ups and downs, but I think it's ups and downs for everybody, not just me. I think we all have ups and downs, but I think it's all within now for me, within the realm of what's okay. I'm not worried about doing something terrible. I'm not worried about overdosing or taking pills, or it doesn't even cross my mind to be afraid of that anymore.
Mhm.
So that in itself tells me so much about where I am. Things come up and I feel like I have the tools to deal with them. And so I hope I continue along that path. I hope you all do. I hope we all do. That's a productive life. I'm happy that I got back to being able to do that.
You just said something really significant about path, and that everyone has the opportunity to be on a path. Not everyone is engaging it wholeheartedly, I think, in my experience of people. I think some of the in our earlier conversation tonight about confidence in your ability to recover. So Jack and Janneli, you both said we weren't thinking about that so much, but at the same time, what I know of you both, and I think people who are actively engaged in their own path, there's a lot of curiosity and openness about what we're experiencing, and that extends to someone else, as opposed to thinking that you're some static object and something, a constellation of problems that simply needs to be fixed. You're a fluid human being too, and your sanity can be invited forward just like ours can, and that creates an atmosphere, I think, of invitation for one's sanity. I think also, to the point about stigma, I mean, I have my own stigma of my own self, that I don't feel comfortable revealing certain things to certain people. They don't want to know it anyway. But at the same time, there's a continuum of stigma, and there's a very, very heavy end of it. Janneli, you talked about all manner of kind of othering, and people in positions that are more prone to being othered. It's pervasive, but the world of mental health is really, really heavy with stigma. And I appreciate your courage to come out and talk just this openly, Julia, very much so. We're coming to the end of our recording time together. I've really enjoyed my time doing this. I've been very inspired by all of your contributions. Dr. Green, his quiet presence. Julia, how you've shown up and really kept this conversation in a grounded, immediate, wakeful way, as opposed to kind of getting off into abstractions and things that I know I can do sometimes. You've really kept this very present, which I think was likewise, the path we shared together back a long time ago. You kept us really present. It was great. Not always easy. And when we started this, you, Julia, said part of the inspiration for you to do this was you were hoping that your story would be helpful for someone. I've kept that in mind as we've gone through this. I can't imagine if anybody is really trying to learn about this territory, what you've been through, but other kinds of struggles as well, just good life struggles. There's so much to be learned and gained and helped with throughout this conversation. So I just really want to thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you too, Chuck, for kind of holding this whole piece and tracking things through and bringing in really pertinent questions and helping us to think this through as well.
It's been great to be part of this, and it's great to connect with all three of you again. And there's some kind of illusion that I think it's been dispelled some, but that you haven't been. You're kind of interviewing us and things in this process, Chuck. But you were absolutely involved in this. You've
Mhm.
always been part of this team. It's not like you're an outside interviewer, even though you're playing that role very nicely. I appreciate it. You're hosting us very well, but you're very involved, and
Mhm.
Well, for me, this has been an incredible experience. Um, I have known, I knew all of you at a very different time in my life, and a very painful, difficult, hard time in my life. And to come back and have this kind of contact with all of you now is, uh, I don't even know how to describe what this is like for me. It's it's joyful. It's um, it's wonderful in so many ways, and in so many ways, it's been painful bringing back a lot of memories of things, but it's also been so um, amazing to spend time with you. And now I'm going to go through withdrawal again and miss you all so much again. And I want to echo what you said about Chuck, because for me, you have been an integral part of it all. You know, whenever I couldn't reach Jack or Janneli, I had you on speed dial, and you came through instantly. You always answered your phone, and you always called me right back, and you came over sometimes, and you were always there. So for me, you were very much a part of this Windhorse team, very much a part of what helped me be where I am today. And so this has been kind of like a whirlwind of my getting better, reviewing everything from kind of the beginning, and here we are at the end, and I love you all so much.
I think for anyone listening to this, whether they've gone through a process like you have, Julia, whether they're in a position like the three of us as professionals, this is a really remarkable situation we've just gone through, where the whole path of working together, stopping and then coming back and kind of reviewing our process together. This is really really unusual, and I trust that people will see this and benefit from it. And
I really hope so. It-
mhm,
It's very unique
mhm.
what we did, coming back years later and talking about it.
This kind of a discussion, what we've been through, can help people to understand, to be at least curious and create the invitation that recovery is possible. It really is. We know that. There's a lot of people who've gone through some kinds of processes, not,
Mhm.
not as, yours was extreme, and this was an unusual thing we've done here. But to just help people understand that's possible, to be curious about it and invite it.
And I think that can give so much hope to somebody. I would think that
Yeah.
you can get through something.
Mhm.
Um, it is possible.
Thank you for listening to the final episode of this 5-part series. We hope that these recordings can be a voice for those still suffering, and send our deep gratitude to Julia and her team for their willingness to share. Stay tuned for next month's episode, the first of a series that dives into all of the roles that make up a Windhorse team, beginning with basic attendance.
Windhorse Journal is a publication of Windhorse Community Services, supporting recovery from mental health challenges at home and in the community since 1981.